Once again, I'd like to say thanks to Reverend Chris for continuing his inspiring reflections every day and for the wonderful services that he brings to us. I'd like to thank the entire team who work on those, bringing us music and readings and giving us our Sunday worship. And of course, Reverend Chris also wrote a beautiful prayer this week, reflecting on the experience we've been through as we move out of quarantine and toward more normality. And we look forward to our own church in Moneyreagh opening soon. Of course, some of us are still shielding, some of us are still waiting for final confirmation from doctors that we may leave our homes and that things may relax more for us. And during that period of time, we're going to continue to appreciate the reflections and the virtual services that are brought to us. And in his sermon this week, Reverend Chris spoke very interestingly about the concept of sin and how we as liberal Christians might resist talking about sin, might feel that that's a concept that's too old-fashioned or perhaps belongs in other areas of Christianity than in our own. And I too am inclined to be wary of the idea of sin, but Reverend Chris makes me think about this and face up to it. And he spoke particularly about the sin of pride, and so he shows us how this is relevant to us and to our own lives. And so, inspired and given courage by Reverend Chris, I'm going to speak for a moment about something that we're even less likely to want to think about as liberal Christians, and that's the idea of Satan. Because I think that we consider demons and devils to be an aspect of the medieval church and far distant from us, although I don't think that many of us would disagree that we see plenty of evidence on a daily basis of the role of evil in the world and in our lives. The Satan I wanted to speak about was the Satan that's presented to us and characterised by John Milton in his great poem Paradise Lost. And I'm sure everyone is familiar with the saying, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, which is attributed to Satan by Milton and which shows us Satan as a very proud character. Pride is what causes Satan to fall, to rebel against God and to fall, and he ends up in what Milton wonderfully calls pandemonium, the abode of all the devils, and that's where we get that word from. But this may seem very distant from us, very far removed from our lives, because if we think of pride, perhaps we think of taking pride in an achievement. And of course, all our gifts come from God, and we know that God wants us to use these gifts wisely and to develop them and perhaps increase them, but always to remember that they come from God. And here we have the idea of balance that we find in Ecclesiastes, a time for every purpose under heaven. And so while we need to be careful that we develop our gifts and use them properly, and perhaps we may even say that we take pride in our achievements or in the achievements of others, the sin that we need to be aware of is arrogance, the danger of arrogance, perhaps even hubris. And perhaps we associate these ideas with political leaders, with people that we might think of as distant from our own lives. Hubris in particular, the misuse, even the abuse of power, and the failure to see that pride is at the root of this. And this makes me think again of what Milton has Satan say, actually in that same passage where he rejoices in the idea of it being better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. Because there Milton has Satan say, he speaks of profoundest hell receiving its new possessor. And he goes on to say, one who brings a mind not to be changed by place or time. A mind not to be changed by place or time. Now we should all, of course, be able to make up our own minds. We should be able to express ourselves, to know why we think what we think. We don't want to be fickle, and we don't want to be easily led or influenced. But we need to be careful if we're too inflexible, if, like Satan, our minds are not to be changed, because in that lies pride.